What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Tar Heel Illustrated podcast brought to you by TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me as he always does is our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here for a Carolina football-related podcast. We're going to be discussing who Carolina has lost in the portal. Obviously, the portal closed last Sunday. 4 guys leaving the Tar Heels, and we're going to go in depth on it right now. So, AJ, I'm going to list off the 4 guys that Carolina lost in the portal, and then I'll kick it to you to kind of, talk about what Carolina lost in the portal, for lack of a better word. You got DeAndre Hollins, Bryson Jennings, Jaquarius Conley, and Gabe Stevens. First thing that jumps out, I think, for me real quickly is, a lot of these guys, barring Conley with the injury last year, kind of reserve guys, haven't played a ton over the last few years, some younger than others. But what are your thoughts with what Carolina lost in the portal with these 4 guys?
I would say that I was a little surprised when Don Chapman entered.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was a little surprised when John Chapman pulled his name out of the
came
portal
back,
and went back to Carolina. And I guess at the time I was surprised. We learned about Conley a couple of days before it came out, and we obviously wanted to allow that to play itself out. But that was a surprise at the moment. But then when I started thinking back to what we saw, and you and I did some pods, Brandon and I did a pod or two when we talked a little bit about him. In fact, I did the position group depth chart thing that we're still running on the site. And, I was thinking, boy, maybe I should list Conley as a star and a corner and at safety. And I guess when I'm thinking that, it meant that he hadn't fully established himself anywhere. He's gotten healthier. He wasn't wearing a brace. He looked better, but he didn't look the same. You and I talked about that, I think, on a pod about 2 weeks ago. He still didn't look like he was 100% there. And I think the injury was a big part of it. And to be honest with you, it was encouraged that he probably goes somewhere and where he could play. And he was, I would say it's fair to say he was probably 3rd on the depth chart. He is a perfect example of why all these kids need to get their educations, need to keep everything in order, because football, the player you are at one moment can be taken away from you in the next moment. And he clearly isn't the same athlete yet that he was before the injury. I think it's really unfortunate. He was a guy that had NFL potential. No doubt about it. He was a guy that could hit, play the run well, he's really talented dude. And it just wasn't going to happen anymore in North Carolina. So he was encouraged to move on. I don't think that his camp was happy about that. They wanted to make it work in Chapel Hill. This wasn't someone who is leaving a sinking ship or anything like that, like some people reacted. It's amazing what people out there say when they don't really pay much attention. So it's unfortunate he's moved on. I really, really like watching the kid. I think his dad's a neat follow on Twitter, but he's going to go somewhere and have a chance to play. And hopefully he won't get injured again, and he'll have a solid football career and maybe finds his old self again. That'd be really neat.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, no doubt. I think Conley was the one that fans were, like you mentioned, probably most surprised about, most, I don't know if upset's the right word, but kind of overreactionary with was his loss. And again, we had talked about it behind the scenes a couple of days before the news broke, because I think we had talked about potentially.
I told you it was happening.
Yeah. We had talked about mentioning something in a podcast, and we, as we usually do, just decided to kind of hold off on that out of respect for him and the announcement and everything going through, because you never know what can happen. Just because, somebody's transferring one day, Don Chapman's a perfect example. It doesn't mean 3 days later he might not have changed his mind. But
and it's just not fair to float something like that out there.
No. It's not our. Let
them do it. Let them do it when they're ready.
That's their right to make that announcement. It's not our right, just so we can say we were first.
But we were prepared for it.
Yeah, we were definitely prepared.
That's the great thing about getting it. But in his case too, a lot of people wouldn't have believed us.
No, they probably wouldn't have.
Which is crazy, because we've never had to write a retraction, but a lot of people wouldn't have believed us.
No.
And that's why I think the reaction was so strong, because a lot of people still think of him being the guy he was before the injury. They didn't have the luxury of seeing him 3 times this spring like I did, and twice, I guess, like you did. So, and he wasn't bad. He's a good football player, but he wasn't the same guy yet. And
Yeah.
maybe the staff figured that they don't have time to wait for the same guy. Maybe they need to go fill that spot somewhere else. There is a win now mindset in the Keenan Football Center. Year 5 of the MAC Part 2. You got to dart forward instead of going around to give people some time. And I think we've seen them handle things that way with some of the players they've moved out and some of the players they brought in and how they're going about certain things. So unfortunately, it turned out this way, but I think the program is okay moving forward because that's part of their plan. And I don't believe there will be a moment this season where people say, man, they wish they had Conley back, unless Conley goes somewhere else and he's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Which I hope happens for him.
Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah. I mean, he just so unfortunate for so many reasons. He just never should have been.
They have a lot of safeties,
to be honest with you, but
they have a lot of safeties. Biggers and Hardy.
And there's a lot of depth in that room. Yeah, and I think
there's a lot of depth in that room.
I think that's why a guy like Don Chapman, who we hit on in a second, I mean, he was probably the one that I was like, that one's probably the one when he left that I was like, that's probably and I don't think any of these are huge losses. Let me get that straight here. But I thought he was probably the biggest because he can play safety, he can play corner, he's experienced. I mean, heck, he started a lot of games in at times in North Carolina. So having a guy like him as a backup, I think is a big plus. But when you look at the other guys, Bryson Jennings, Gabe Stevens, Dede Hollins, I know Dede Hollins been around the program for a long time. I think he actually announced he was going to enter the portal after the season. Or was it last year?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And then he came back because so many guys left, and he said, hey, I want to come back and play in the bowl game and help you guys out and see how things go. And again, they have gotten better in the secondary. We've talked about this over the last couple of months.
They've improved,
they've improved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe Day figured I've been a reserve for several years. He was huge in 19 and 20. Stepping up when they had a lot of injuries at corner, but he transferred to Charlotte. He'll start there. He'll play a lot. So he's had the big time experience. Now he's going to get to go somewhere and get to play 70 snaps a game, which is awesome for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. And I think in the other two guys in Bryson Jennings and Gabe Stevens, guys that probably weren't going to see the field much this year anyway. And Gabe Stevens, a guy that's been around for a couple of years now, hasn't really gotten an opportunity at that. Did some nice things in the spring game, like we've talked about. There's always a few kids that you never hear about again or transfer that make some nice plays in the spring game, so you never take too much away from it. But did have some glimpses there, and Bryson Jennings, another guy who just again probably wasn't going to get much of an opportunity this season anyway. And with the portal, AJ, this is just the new landscape of college sports. We talk about it a lot. I mean, countless people talk about this at length. People like to overreact about guys entering the portal depth wise. And when I look at this list, I just don't see a need for any overreaction. I don't see any need for fans to be like, oh, this, here we go again. Carolina football just waiting to disappoint us again. I don't think anybody that Carolina lost in the portal, A, was somebody who was penciled in to start. There's no doubt about that. But B, was probably really going to have too much of an opportunity, barring injuries and barring maybe starters just not playing up to their standard for whatever reason. So I think it's been I think it's Carolina can live with what they've lost in the portal. And I think ultimately with going into the rest of the offseason, now that Carolina's actively after guys, which we'll talk about here in a second, I think Carolina's got a pretty good choice to maybe upgrade depth wise in a couple of different positions too.
For sure. No doubt about that. As far as the guys they lost here last week, it was a 2-week portal open the 15th, close the 30th. Mm-hmm. Barely lose depth, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to those kids.
No, you're not. It's the truth, yeah.
Jaquarius is in a different situation. Day gave them distant depth in case disaster happens, and he had already served the program well. So it's okay. I think moving on is good for him. Now, I was told by someone extremely deeply in the know before spring practice that the expectation was Stevens would probably end up moving on after spring practice. I think that he's someone that came in and hadn't quite developed at a rate that they thought he would. And I think there was a little bit of, well, we need you to get from this point to that point here in the next 5 weeks in spring if you're going to have a chance to get on the field.
Yeah,
and when they have the exit interviews with the players, I'm pretty confident that he was told he wasn't going to get on the field. Maybe some special teams, and that was about it. So for him, it's a good decision to move on. unless he just wants to be a part of the program because he has a chance to play somewhere. He's a talented kid, but he just wasn't going to get on the field. As far as Jennings goes, I would say that's a little bit of a surprise because you think maybe he would stick around another year to see how he develops, but he hadn't really progressed. He hadn't moved up the ladder, if you will, and he's had some time. So I think maybe he's looking at in that room and saying, gosh, I don't know. This is a little bit tough. I want to go somewhere where I'm going to get on the field and play right away or play sooner rather than later. And he actually transferred to Liberty. So he's going to play at Liberty, which is a good program. It's not too far from his home. So he's going to have a chance to still play a high level college football and have a lot of success. And Liberty can send guys to the NFL too. So a lot of these kids can go somewhere else and still reach their dreams. And that's the great thing about the portal. They're not so bound. They're not so anchored down through NCAA mandates that they can't just go find their dream through a different avenue. So it frees up UNC with some open scholarships, some open spots, and it gives those kids a chance to go do something that they go approach their dream somewhere else. And you're right, the depth thing, even if you go back to what Carolina lost in the winter, back in December, I'm telling you, who cares about the snaps that went out? Because there are reasons things happen. Two of the guys that left then left the schools they went to already. So I'm not going to say their names, but two of them went to schools and then left, and now they're both at the same school in the ACC. So one of them has now worn ACC gear from 3 different ACC schools in the last 5 months.
Pretty wild, isn't it?
It's wild.
Transfer portal for you, man. It's
so that's where the portal's kind of silly. But you know what? Maybe that's the best thing for these guys. And if it's what's best for them, and they're not hurting anybody, then who cares?
Yeah, no. I think you're absolutely right with that. Last thing we'll talk about, just any positions in particular. I know we've talked about this in previous podcasts that you think would make sense for the Tar Heels to go out and bring in a couple guys in the portal, maybe for depth wise, or just to provide some, maybe, somebody to play a lot of minutes. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they would love to bring in 1 or 2 offensive linemen. They have not developed linemen that they've recruited since Mac returned. They haven't done a real. That's a good point. They really haven't. When you look at a lot of the O linemen they've brought in, none of them have really developed too much. The only offensive lineman in the rotation right now, or who has been in the rotation, that came in while with Mack being head coach is Jonathan Adorno. Yeah,
Adorno, yeah.
Caden Baker played a little bit a couple years ago. He retired because of injury here a couple of months ago, so he's no longer in the mix. That's it. So they don't have the next wave of offensive linemen marching in the proper time space, if you will, to be ready when these guys move on. And they're going to lose Barnes. They're going to lose Montilus. They're going to lose Rayner. They're going to lose Rowland. He's got 1 more year. So they need guys to step in. And right now they go 6 deep.
Yeah.
So, and they want to go 8. So if they're going to lose 4 guys for sure, then they really got to bolster. So
AJ, can I ask you something real quick about the O-line?
Yeah.
What do you bring down, or what do you make of the lack of development? Because to me, at that position, the easy answer would probably be just the amount of change they've had in terms of the position coach down there. Do you think that is what might has a lot to do with it, or do you think it's something else?
I think Stacey Searles is a good offensive line coach. I know a lot of other fans don't agree with that, but he was the offensive line coach at Georgia this past season and won a national title. So in football, you just don't inherit talent and then make the talent be, and the talent's great without your effect. Football coaches absolutely have an effect on how the talent performs. There's no doubt about it. It's one of the reasons they make the money that they make. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the issue was. Perhaps they misjudged in recruiting. Mac said late in spring practice that the 2 positions that are the hardest to recruit, given projecting where you think a kid might be, is offensive line and quarterback. And I think right now you're looking at a situation, since we're talking about what they've been looking for, those are the 2 positions that I think there's a lot of uncertainty after this season. The offensive line, as I already noted, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty about quarterback after Drake moves on. I think it's a concern. They like Connor Harrell. I think they think Connor Harrell can be really good, but Connor right now isn't where Jacoby Criswell was this time a year ago, eventually becoming Drake's backup. They would have been in better hands with Jacoby if something happened to Drake, I think, than they would be right now if something happens to Drake and they have to throw Connor in there. So if the right quarterback entered the portal, I think that, or would have entered the portal, I think they would have been very interested in bringing someone in to be QB2 now and maybe be the heir apparent. They still have to win the job, obviously, but they would like that, but it's a hard thing to do. They may have to get the starting quarterback in 2024 next spring in the portal, next winter in the portal, more likely than maybe right now. But offensive linemen are out there. They need some guys that could be rotation players now, which means if something happens, they step in and start. And attrition always hits the offensive linemen. So the guys would have to think, even if I'm, a backup guard and center to start the season when they play South Carolina, you could end up a starter the next series and have that position the rest of the year. That's how Brian Anderson got the job when Nick Polino got hurt against Miami several years ago. Yeah. So that's offensive line. You have to be prepared for attrition. I don't think they're prepared for attrition right now. And the other thing is that guy would then be pretty much the starter moving ahead in 2024. So if they grabbed a couple of offensive linemen in the portal, it would not surprise me at all. There are a lot of guys out there. There are a lot of guys from big-time programs out there that were highly rated before. A lot of them have played, so they're experienced. So I think we could see some activity there. Quarterback might be a little different because I don't know exactly who's in the portal. I haven't looked at all the quarterbacks in the portal. I figured that we'll start hearing if there's conversations, we'll catch wind of some of that, and then we'll start zeroing in on that. I'm just not going to go look at every quarterback listed and just guess whether or not UNC has been in contact until we actually hear something.
Yeah, well, quarterback's an interesting position, too, in terms of bringing a guy in this offseason because, if you're going to bring somebody in that you expect to be the starter in a year, they've got to have some level of pretty high talent that you value. But convincing a guy like that in today's world, in today's transfer portal world, to come in and sit behind Drake for a year is also going to be a challenge if the guy really is good enough to start at North Carolina and replace Drake May. So it would kind of make sense maybe if you wait on that a little bit, because I do think just it's going to be hard to find somebody that wants to do that, and that is good enough to do that, wants to do that, and is good enough to develop and become a really good player for North Carolina in the future. I think you have to find a kind of unique case there that I don't know how many of those guys are out there,
I agree. And there are two sides to this part of the discussion. One is, to your point, man, I may never take snap.
Yeah.
And
you could have.
So why would I want to sit behind this guy? He's Mr. Football, Mr. All-American. And also, why would I then want to be the guy who replaces the greatest quarterback in Carolina history who could win a Heisman Trophy, could be a number one pick in the NFL draft, and who knows what the team does if they have an incredible year and do something nationally relevant? It's going to be first and foremost because of Drake.
Yeah.
So do you want that pressure? A lot of guys, most quarterbacks are okay with pressure. That's why they play the position. It takes a different kind of dude to start playing quarterback in 5th grade and sort of be the man, and with all the responsibilities that come with it, then there's a reason a lot of other guys don't play quarterback.
Yeah, 100%.
At an age group when all the kids are sort of the same in some respects, it's a different mindset that plays quarterback. So I do think a lot of guys would welcome that challenge, because I think the positive side of that for someone who were to jump into that position is that, man, I get to learn behind this guy for a year. Man, this is a program that creates NFL quarterbacks, because Sam's going to be starting for the Redskins. Like, holy crap, I've got Clyde Christensen to learn from. Freddie Kitchens, NFL head coach. He's coached quarterbacks before. Chip Lindsey's got a great reputation. Oh, my goodness, Mac Brown. So I think that the positive probably outweighs the negative, especially given the fact that most quarterbacks believe that they are the second coming of Tom Brady and Joe Namath.
You kind of have to be to be successful.
Not Joe Namath. Why did I say Joe Namath? I don't know why he was in my. He was a good quarterback, but I was going to say Joe Montana.
Not a bad quarterback. Yeah.
I was going to say Joe, because Joe Montana was the greatest quarterback ever until Tom Brady eclipsed him.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there too, and I also think that even if you bring a guy in, it's not necessarily a guarantee they're going to start, because there's still Connor Harrell and Tad Hudson, who we talked about. They're talented kids. They're not pushovers, you know?
Yeah. Harrell's one of those guys that it's kind of hard to bet against a guy like that because he's so smart. Yeah. He is very talented. He's very athletic.
Winner, too, when you look at his high school.
He is 6 feet. I think Lindsey's offense with a little bit more drop and pro stuff, I think they want a taller guy.
Probably. Yeah.
Harrell kind of fits more what Longo wants, or prefers, or is okay with. I shouldn't say wants or prefers. Strike that from the record. I just say that he's okay with that. Lindsey, I think, wants a little bit of a taller guy more than likely, but who knows? I still think Connor Harrell could be pretty good in college at some point, somewhere. But
just has to continue to develop. Yeah, he's not.
Yeah, in one other position, if they were to bring in an inside linebacker, again, an apprentice type who can play behind those guys, and let's face it, is hard and physical as Cedric and Power are, they could get hurt anytime too. I don't think they would be super confident with two guys right now stepping in if one or both of them went down. I think they're gaining confidence in Deuce Caldwell. I really do. And they need to see Sebastian Cheeks on the field.
Yeah, 100%.
August is going to be incredibly important for him. So maybe they bring in some insurance there. It wouldn't surprise me if they did. I'm not sure they're going to bring in anybody anywhere else. Like you said, with the guys that they lost in the portal, they didn't really even lose depth there.
No,
they don't need
to
replenish any of those spots.
Yeah, it's not like you have to go find 4 guys because you lost, 4 second string players, and now your depth has been diminished. It's not really that case. And yeah, I do agree. I think those are the position groups Carolina's focusing on, should focus on, and that what makes the most sense because, again, I think O-line depth is an issue and has been an issue, like you mentioned, really since Mac got back, just not being able, for whatever reason, to develop the amount of talent down there that they want to.
You know what? I didn't fully answer your question about that. I do think the fact that they went 10 months with 3 different offensive line coaches didn't help. But
it couldn't help, yeah.
But there was a period of lack of development before that. So that, I think, is the question. Maybe that's changed. I like a lot of things I see from Randy Clements. I like his approach, but there were some things I liked about Bicknell, but I'm not sure Bicknell was totally dialed in the way he needs to be. I think Clements is. Clements has a really good track record. If you think back to the Baylor game and the bowl game a couple of years ago, that was Randy Clements' offensive line paving the way for those guys.
Steamrolling North Carolina.
Yeah, and I went back and looked at all the numbers, the sack percentages, TFL percentages, stuff like that. His offensive lines, he's only had 1 or 2 offensive lines that didn't grade out very well in those departments, and there were extenuating circumstances because you have to have the skill guys to take advantage of it. And if you don't have a good quarterback, you're going to struggle in all those departments. So for the most part, he developed guys at Baylor. They put some guys in the NFL. So I think that should change moving forward, but I'm not going to say it will until I see it happen, because that's been the most puzzling aspect of MAC Part 2 is the lack of development on the offensive line. Yeah. But maybe that's changing now.
Yeah,
I get the vibe that it is.
Yeah, you would think so, and I think I think some stability down there for a little bit, like you said, would help a little bit too. I mean, that's just the message, because like you said, you could have a guy that coaches one way, and then the next guy who comes in is a completely different way. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to coach that position group, but the methods are different. It takes an adjusting to understand how to adapt to it. And then instead of developing, you're just trying to kind of figure out what you're supposed to be doing out there instead of knowing what you're supposed to do and excelling in it and developing in that. So I think that has to play a factor.
From what I gather, we'll close out here in a second. From what I gather, seeing the practices I did and just general conversations and stuff, is that preaching getting off the snap low has happened more since Clements got there than it was before. And you could see some of the drills. I think one of the videos you did with some drills, you could see them doing some things that keep the linemen lower, because you get out the ball lower, you got the snap lower, you can get into the defensive lineman, and it's easier to lift and turn. It's easier to manipulate. And so I think that's one of the points of emphasis that is really, it was always been stressed, but I think it's been stressed more under Randy Clements than it was before. And that will certainly help in all aspects. Also the footwork stuff. You got to have better footwork. You can do the hands and everything else, but if the footwork's not great and you don't react properly, you don't react well in pass protection, then you're going to give up sacks. You could win. Drake could drop back 35 times to pass. You could win 31 of those battles, and you could win them decisively. But if you lose 4 and he gets sacked, that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, you're 100%.
You have to have a very high success rate in pass protection.
Yeah.
And I think getting off the ball well is a big part of that and having better footwork. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, you can protect Drake May, good things will happen. I'll just put it that way. And we'll wrap the podcast up on that as well. I've been at Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Appreciate y'all watching, as always, talking a little Carolina football. Make sure you guys keep it locked to TarHillIllustrated.com. Come, join our premium message boards. Become a premium member for just $8.33 a month. You can be a Carolina insider too. Great time to do so. So much stuff going on right now, although it is the off season. And AJ as well. Keep it locked to our YouTube channel. Daily drops going to be starting up soon. A lot of really fun content we're going to be running out. So I think people will enjoy some of the content we'll be putting out over the off season. Some more, related to what's going on now and previous season, but a lot of historical stuff coming too, which I think will be fun for people to discuss and think over. So make sure you guys keep it locked to TarHillIllustrated.com. Hit that subscribe button, like, share, and hit that notification bell too, because we're uploading a lot this off season. So every single time we upload. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.